I'm Sophia Hartwell, 28, female, and my cousin just humiliated me at her brother's wedding for being too poor to afford a new dress. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed across the polished surface of our table, silencing the cheerful chatter around us. I sat there, frozen, the fabric of my simple, decade-old suit feeling like sandpaper against my skin. But they had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea that in less than an hour, a black car would pull up, a man would walk in, and the entire foundation of our family's power dynamic would crumble with the clatter of a single dropped fork. I'm Sophia Hartwell, 28, female, and I'm currently sitting at a wedding reception trying my best to become invisible. That's the thought that kept repeating in my mind like a broken record. The wedding was for my cousin Mark, a genuinely nice guy who had the misfortune of being the son of my Aunt Brenda and the brother of my other cousin, Chloe. Being at any event with Brenda and Chloe was like navigating a minefield of subtle insults and backhanded compliments. But a wedding, their family's big day, was a masterclass in their particular brand of cruelty. The room was a testament to their taste and, more importantly, their budget. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over tables laden with ornate floral arrangements and fine china. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. And then there was me, in my dark navy suit. It wasn't a tuxedo, and it certainly wasn't from the current decade. It was my mother's, a classic, well-made piece from her own brief career in a corporate office before she and my dad decided to open their small, beloved bookstore. It was tailored to fit me perfectly and, in my opinion, was timelessly elegant. But to my aunt's side of the family, timeless was just another word for old, and classic was code for can't afford new. My parents had sent their regrets. My father's health had been a bit fragile lately, and a loud, crowded reception wasn't what the doctor ordered. In truth, I think they were relieved to have an excuse. They loved Mark, but they'd had a lifetime of dealing with Brenda's condescension. I, however, felt obligated to be there, to represent our side of the family, and to show support for a cousin I actually liked. The trouble started, as it always did, with Chloe. She was seated directly across from me, looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover in a shimmering, silver gown that probably cost more than my car. She was holding court, regaling the table with a story about her recent vacation to the Amalfi Coast. The shopping was simply divine, she said, waving a perfectly manicured hand. I found this little boutique utterly exclusive and a designer no one has even heard of yet. That's the key, you see, to be ahead of the trend, not following it. Her eyes flickered towards me for a split second, a tiny, almost imperceptible glance, but I felt it like a spotlight. Her gaze slid down my simple suit, and the corner of her mouth twitched into a smirk. This was her favorite game, highlighting her wealth by implicitly pointing out my lack of it. This dynamic wasn't new. It was the wallpaper of my childhood. I remember one Christmas when I was 10 years old. My parents had saved up to buy me a beautiful, brand-new bicycle. It was bright red, with tassels on the handlebars, and I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to show it off to my cousins. When we arrived at Aunt Brenda's house, Chloe, who was 11, was in the driveway with her new bike. It was a professional-looking mountain bike with 21 gears and shock absorbers. Aunt Brenda had watched me wheel my bike up the driveway and said, with a sickly sweet smile, "Oh, Sophia, dear, that's a very charming little bicycle. It's so good that your parents encourage you to appreciate the simple things." Chloe had just wrinkled her nose and said, "Mine can go off-road." My bright red bicycle suddenly felt small and silly. Then there was my high school graduation. I had worked incredibly hard and earned a significant scholarship to a good state university. I was proud, and my parents were over the moon. At my graduation party, a small backyard barbecue, Aunt Brenda arrived with a gift. It was a fancy leather-bound planner. "For your studies," she'd said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're all so proud of you for finding such an affordable option for your education. It's very practical." Later that evening, I overheard her telling another relative that it was a shame I didn't have the ambition to aim for an Ivy League school like Chloe, who was attending a private, out-of-state university with a staggering price tag. She never mentioned my scholarship or my grades. She only saw the price tag, or lack thereof. So here I was, years later, playing the same part in the same tired play. A younger cousin from another table, someone I didn't know well, leaned over to ask me a question about the bookstore. He was polite and seemed genuinely interested. We were chatting for no more than a minute when Chloe, with the impeccable timing of a predator, interrupted. She didn't even look at me. She leaned towards the young man, placing a hand on his arm as if to save him. She rolled her eyes theatrically and said, in a stage whisper that carried perfectly across the table, "Oh, don't talk to her. She's the one who couldn't even afford a new dress for the wedding." A few people at the table tittered nervously. A couple of Chloe's friends outright giggled. The young man flushed, stammered an apology, and quickly turned away. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye at the table was on me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a familiar, burning shame. I looked at Aunt Brenda, who was watching the scene with a look of quiet, smug satisfaction, as if her daughter had just performed a clever trick. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of the glass. The message was clear: this is your place. Know it. I wanted to stand up and leave. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. I just sat there, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, and stared down at my plate, waiting for the moment to pass. But I held on to a secret, a tiny, flickering ember of hope that I had been nursing for months. I just had to hold on a little longer. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand the two worlds of the Hartwell family. My father and his sister, Brenda, had grown up in the same modest household, but their paths had diverged dramatically. My father became a scholar, a man who found his riches in books and quiet contemplation. He met my mother, who shared his love for stories, and together they built a life based on community, knowledge, and contentment. Their bookstore, Hartwell's Nook, was a local institution, but it never made them wealthy in the way Brenda would understand. Brenda, on the other hand, had married a man with sharp business acumen and even sharper ambition. They climbed the social and financial ladder with fierce determination. She became a high-end real estate agent, dealing in sprawling mansions and exclusive properties. Her world was one of appearances, of networking at the country club, and of ensuring her children, Mark and Chloe, had every material advantage she never did. Over the years, this divergence created a chasm in the family. Our get-togethers were always on their turf, in their massive, sterile house that felt more like a furniture showroom than a home. The conversation always revolved around money, stock portfolios, luxury travel, home renovations, and the latest high-end car purchase. My parents would sit quietly, smiling politely, while I would retreat into myself. We were the quaint side of the family, the simple ones. We were tolerated, but we were never truly seen as equals. Central to this family mythology was the Miller's Creek Vineyard. It wasn't just a piece of land, it was a local legend. Sprawling over 200 acres of rolling hills just outside of town, the vineyard had been owned by the Miller family for over a century. It produced award-winning wines, but old Mr. Miller had passed away a year ago, and his children had no interest in continuing the business. The property was going up for sale. For Aunt Brenda, Miller's Creek was more than just a prime piece of real estate. It was the ultimate status symbol. Owning it would cement her position as the most successful and influential person in the area. For years, at every family dinner, she would talk about it. "When I get my hands on Miller's Creek," she'd announce, swirling a glass of wine, "the first thing I'll do is build a new tasting room. Floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the valley. It'll be the premier event space in the state." Chloe would chime in, "And we'll host a polo match, Mother. It would be so chic." They spoke of it not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. Brenda made it clear she was in talks with the Miller estate, that her offer was just a formality. In her mind, the vineyard was already hers. But I had a different connection to that land. When I was a little girl, before the chasm in our family grew so wide, my grandfather, Brenda and my dad's father, was still alive. He was a groundskeeper at Miller's Creek. He didn't own the land, but he loved it as if he did. On Sunday afternoons, he would take me with him. He'd let me walk the rows of vines, the sun warm on my face. He taught me the names of the different grapes, the feel of the soil, the rhythm of the seasons. He'd point to a small, run-down stone cottage on a hill at the edge of the property. "That's the best view in the whole valley, Sophie," he'd say. "One day, someone's going to fix that up, and they'll be the luckiest person in the world." Those afternoons with my grandfather were some of the purest, happiest memories of my life. The vineyard wasn't a status symbol to me. It was the smell of damp earth after rain. It was the taste of a sun-warmed grape plucked straight from the vine. It was my grandfather's legacy. He had passed away years ago, but my dream of that place never did. While Brenda saw a venue for polo matches, I saw a chance to honor him. While she saw a real estate transaction, I saw a home. And while she was talking, I was working. My lack of ambition, as my aunt called it, was a carefully constructed facade. After getting my degree in business and agriculture, I didn't take a flashy corporate job. I started my own small consulting firm, helping local farms with sustainable practices and financial planning. I lived simply, drove an old car, and rarely bought new things. To my aunt's family, this was proof of my failure to launch. In reality, every dollar I saved, every frugal choice I made, was a step towards a single, monumental goal: buying Miller's Creek. For 5 years, I funneled every spare cent into a high-yield investment account. I took on extra projects, worked weekends, and learned everything I could about land acquisition and the wine industry. I studied the Miller estate, the zoning laws, the water rights. My parents knew of my dream, but I swore them to secrecy. It was too fragile, too important to be subjected to Brenda's scorn or Chloe's ridicule. The announcement of the sale came 6 months ago. It wasn't going to be a simple transaction. The Miller children, wanting to maximize their return, had decided on a sealed bid auction. Interested parties had until a specific date to submit their best and final offer in a sealed envelope. There would be no negotiations, no second chances. The highest bid would win, plain and simple. I knew Aunt Brenda would be bidding. She had the connections, the capital, and the ego. I also knew she would likely underestimate the competition. She'd assume her reputation and a solid, but not extravagant, offer would be enough. I had to go in with a number that was undeniable. The final weeks leading up to the bid deadline were the most intense of my life. I liquidated my entire investment portfolio. I sold a small plot of land I had inherited from my grandfather. I took out a business loan that was so large it made me feel sick to my stomach just looking at the paperwork. I was putting everything I had and everything I could borrow on the line. There was no safety net. If my bid failed, I would be in debt for decades, my dream shattered, and my aunt's "I told you so" would echo for the rest of my life. The day I submitted the bid, my hand was shaking so much I could barely sign my name. I placed the thick manila envelope into the hands of the estate lawyer, a man with tired eyes who had seen it all. He simply nodded and placed it in a locked box with a half-dozen others. "The Miller family will make their decision by the end of the week," he'd said. "We will contact the winning bidder directly." That was 3 days ago. 3 days of checking my phone every 30 seconds, my stomach in a permanent knot. 3 days of imagining both the crushing disappointment of losing and the terrifying reality of winning. And in the middle of this agonizing wait, I had to attend Mark's wedding. Buying a new dress was the furthest thing from my mind. Every single dollar I had was tied up in that bid. The old suit in my closet wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. It was the uniform of my sacrifice. When I looked in the mirror before leaving for the wedding, I didn't see an old suit. I saw 5 years of relentless work, the ghost of my grandfather's smile, and the biggest gamble of my life. And I prayed it would be enough. The wedding reception was in full swing. The band was playing a soft jazz number, and waiters moved silently between the tables, refilling glasses. I had managed to survive the initial sting of Chloe's comment, retreating into a shell of polite silence. I ate my chicken, pushed my vegetables around the plate, and tried to focus on anything other than the smug look on my aunt's face. The table was mostly populated by Brenda and Chloe's friends, people who measured worth in carats and square footage. The conversation was a dizzying carousel of brand names and exotic locales. "We just got back from Aspen," one woman said, flashing a diamond bracelet. "The skiing was fabulous, of course, but the après-ski is the real sport." "Tell me about it," another chimed in. "Did you see the new Chanel boutique they opened? To die for." I felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. Their concerns and triumphs were so alien to my own. My biggest recent accomplishment was securing a grant for a local dairy farm to install solar panels. It was a victory that had brought me immense satisfaction, but it wasn't the kind of story you told at a table like this. Aunt Brenda, sensing an opportunity to further twist the knife, turned her attention to me. Her smile was thin, predatory. "Sophia, dear," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "We were all so sorry to hear your father wasn't feeling up to coming. I do hope he and your mother are managing. That little bookstore must be such a struggle in this day and age, with Amazon and all." The implication was clear. You are poor, your parents are poor, you are struggling. "They're doing just fine, Aunt Brenda," I said, my voice tight. "They have loyal customers. People still appreciate the feel of a real book." Chloe let out a little scoff. "Oh, please, it's a charity case. People go there because they feel sorry for them." The cruelty of the remark took my breath away. She wasn't just insulting me, she was insulting my parents, their life's work, their integrity. The anger that flared in my chest was hot and fierce. I opened my mouth to retaliate, to say something, anything, to defend them. But what could I say? Yelling at her would only make me look unhinged. Explaining the value of what my parents did would be like describing color to someone who could only see in shades of gray. Before I could speak, Chloe delivered the final blow. It was the moment from the title, the one that would be seared into my memory forever. The young cousin, trying to be kind, had leaned over again. "I really do love your parents' store," he'd said quietly, trying to undo the damage. That's when Chloe cut him off. She leaned forward, her silver dress catching the light, and announced to the table at large, "Honestly, I wouldn't bother. She's probably not in a very chatty mood." She paused for dramatic effect, letting all eyes drift to me. Then came the words, laced with disdain. "After all, she's the one who couldn't even afford a new dress for the wedding." This time, the laughter was less restrained. It was a ripple of genuine, cruel amusement from Chloe's friends. Aunt Brenda didn't laugh, but her smile widened. She had won. She had successfully framed me as a pathetic charity case, an object of pity and scorn. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. My face was burning. My hands, hidden under the table, were shaking. I stared at the intricate pattern on my porcelain plate, focusing on a tiny blue flower as if it could pull me out of the room. In that moment, I felt utterly and completely alone. The dream of the vineyard felt distant and foolish, a child's fantasy. I was just Sophia Hartwell, the girl in the old suit, the family failure. I took a slow, deep breath, fighting back the tears that were stinging the backs of my eyes. All I had to do was get through the cake cutting. Then I could slip out unnoticed. The toast to the happy couple, Mark and his lovely new wife, Amelia, was a brief respite. For a few minutes, the focus shifted away from our table. I used the opportunity to compose myself, forcing a smile as glasses were raised. Mark caught my eye from the head table and gave me a warm, genuine smile. He was a good man, and I felt a pang of guilt that my inner turmoil was overshadowing his happy day. Soon, the towering, 5-tiered wedding cake was wheeled to the center of the dance floor. The band struck up a cheerful tune, and the photographer began orchestrating the classic cake-cutting shots. This was my chance. While everyone was distracted, I could make my escape. I quietly pushed my chair back, preparing to slip away towards the exit. It was then that I saw it through the grand, floor-to-ceiling windows of the venue. A sleek, black sedan had pulled up to the circular driveway, a vehicle far too somber and official-looking for a wedding. It had no ribbons, no decorations. It just sat there, its engine humming quietly, looking serious and out of place. My heart gave a little jolt. No, it couldn't be. I told myself it was just another guest arriving late, or perhaps a car service for someone important. A man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit stepped out of the driver's side. He wasn't a guest. He carried a leather folio under his arm and had the purposeful, no-nonsense air of a courier or a lawyer. He scanned the entrance of the venue, then strode confidently towards the doors. My escape plan vanished. I sank back into my chair, my eyes glued to the entrance. My breath caught in my throat. The man entered the reception hall, pausing for a moment to let his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. He spoke quietly to one of the wedding coordinators, who then pointed a discreet finger in the direction of our general area. The man started walking towards our table. A ripple of confusion spread through the guests who noticed him. Who was this serious-looking man with a folder at a wedding? My cousin Chloe noticed him first. "Who is that?" she whispered to her mother, her nose wrinkled in disapproval at the interruption. Aunt Brenda squinted. "I don't know, he looks like a bill collector." My pulse was hammering in my ears. The world seemed to slow down. The man's footsteps on. The marble floor sounded like drumbeats. He navigated through the tables with a polite grace, his eyes scanning the faces. I saw his gaze pass over Chloe, then over Aunt Brenda. For a fleeting second, I thought he might be there for her. After all, she was the important one, the real estate mogul, the only Hartwell who would be expecting important business. He stopped at the edge of our table. The few people still seated looked up at him, a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. He cleared his throat softly. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice calm and professional, yet loud enough to be heard over the distant music. He looked directly at my aunt first, then around the table. "Is Miss Hartwell here?" Aunt Brenda immediately straightened up, a flicker of pride on her face. Of course he was here for her. She was about to answer when Chloe, ever eager, spoke for her. "My mother is Brenda Hartwell," she said, gesturing with a dismissive wave. "What is this regarding?" The man gave a polite but firm smile. He shook his head slightly. "My apologies, I'm looking for Miss Sofia Hartwell." The name hung in the air. Time seemed to stop completely. Chloe's jaw went slack. Aunt Brenda's proud expression dissolved into pure, slack-jawed confusion. Every head at the table swiveled in my direction. Their expressions were a comical mix of shock and disbelief. Me, Sofia, the girl in the old suit. Slowly, my limbs feeling like they were moving through water, I stood up. "I'm Sofia Hartwell," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The man's professional demeanor softened into a kind smile. He stepped towards me, extending the leather folio. "I was instructed to deliver this to you personally, Ms. Hartwell, as soon as the decision was made." My fingers trembled as I took the folder from him. It felt impossibly heavy, as if it contained the weight of the past 5 years. I could feel the eyes of my entire family on me, burning with 1,000 unasked questions. The man leaned in closer, lowering his voice so that only I could hear. "They accepted your bid," he whispered, his voice warm with congratulations. "The Miller family was incredibly impressed with your proposal and your vision. The vineyard, it's yours." The words washed over me, a tidal wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. It was real. It had happened. I wasn't dreaming. I ran a thumb over the edge of the folder, a silent, tactile confirmation. It was mine. The land my grandfather had loved, the rows of vines that held my happiest childhood memories, the little stone cottage on the hill, it was all mine. The man gave a final, respectful nod. "Congratulations, Ms. Hartwell." And with that, he turned and walked away, as discreetly as he had arrived. For a long moment, I just stood there, clutching the folder to my chest. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The man's words were enough. The knot of anxiety that had been lodged in my stomach for months, for years, finally dissolved. In its place, a quiet, powerful sense of vindication began to bloom. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked around the room. The cake-cutting ceremony was frozen, forgot. Mark and Amelia were staring, their mouths slightly agape, but my focus was on my table, on my family. Chloe's face was a mask of utter bewilderment. Her perfectly applied lipstick seemed to be the only color in her suddenly pale face. She looked from me to the retreating figure of the man, then back to me, her brain clearly unable to process what had just happened. And then I looked at my Aunt Brenda. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. Her face, which moments ago had been a portrait of smug superiority, was now crumbling. She knew exactly what bid the man was talking about. She knew there was only one prize we could both have been fighting for. The confidence drained out of her, replaced by a raw, unfiltered shock. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish. Her manicured hand, which was holding her dessert fork, began to tremble. And then it happened. The fork slipped from her grasp. It hit her plate with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed in the sudden silence of the hall. The sound was like a gavel falling, signaling the end of an era. The end of her reign, the end of me being the family footnote. In that one small metallic sound, I heard everything. I heard the shattering of her pride, the collapse of her ambition, the screeching halt of her condescension. She, Brenda Hartwell, the real estate queen, the woman who had everything, had been outmaneuvered. Not by a corporate rival or a wealthy investor, but by me. By her quiet, bookish niece in an old, hand-me-down suit. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel shame. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I just felt a strange, quiet pity. Her entire world was built on a foundation of appearances and status, and I had just pulled the cornerstone out. From under it, I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the new reality. Then, without a word to any of them, I turned and walked towards the exit, the leather folder held securely in my hand. I didn't need to stay for the rest of the party. The celebration was already over. Walking out of that reception hall was like stepping out of a pressurized cabin into the fresh, open air. I didn't run. I walked calmly, my steps even and measured. I could feel the stunned silence behind me, but I didn't look back. That chapter of my life was over. Once outside in the cool evening air, I leaned against the cold brick of the building and finally took a deep, shuddering breath. The tears that I had fought back so hard earlier now came, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of relief, of release, of an overwhelming joy that was so pure it was almost painful. I laughed and cried at the same time, clutching the folder as if it were a life raft. I called my parents. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Sophia, is everything okay? You're home early." "Everything is more than okay, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I got it. I got the vineyard." A moment of stunned silence, and then my mother's shriek of joy, followed by my father's booming voice in the background. She did it. I knew she would. Their pride and happiness, so genuine and unconditional, was the real victory. It was the validation I had truly been seeking all along. By the time I was halfway home, my phone started buzzing. The first text was from Chloe. What was that all about? What vineyard? I ignored it. 5 minutes later, another text from her, the tone already shifting. "Aunt Brenda is really upset. Maybe you should call her." I ignored that one too. Then came the phone call from Aunt Brenda herself. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a masterwork of barely concealed panic. "Sophia, dear, it's your aunt. I think there has been some sort of misunderstanding. Perhaps we could call me." The next morning, the desperation escalated. There were more texts, more missed calls. Chloe sent a long, rambling message about how she was just joking at the wedding and how she'd always admired my independent spirit. Aunt Brenda sent a text that simply said, "I hear you bought Miller's Creek. I have some ideas for the property I'd love to share. My treat for lunch." They didn't get it. They thought this was a transaction, that my forgiveness could be bought with a free lunch, that their approval was something I still craved. I spent that day not answering my phone, but walking the land that was now mine. I drove my old car up the winding dirt road. past the endless rows of sleeping vines, all the way to the top of the hill where the small, dilapidated stone cottage stood. I got out and walked to the edge, looking out over the breathtaking valley my grandfather had loved so much. This was real, this was mine, not for status, not for polo matches, but for legacy, for quiet work and rich soil, for him. A week later, I finally responded to Aunt Brenda. I sent a simple, polite email. I thanked her for her interest, but explained that I had my own vision for the vineyard, one that I had been developing for many years. I told her I would be scaling back on family commitments for the foreseeable future to focus on the project. I ended by wishing her and her family well. It was a boundary, clear and firm. It wasn't born of anger, but of peace. I had nothing left to prove to them. Their opinions, which had once felt like the sun and moon, were now just distant, flickering stars. I could see them, but they no longer dictated my orbit. My parents and I spent that first weekend at the cottage, planning. My dad was already mapping out where he wanted to put a small library. My mom was sketching ideas for a wildflower garden. We weren't talking about property values or marketing strategies. We were talking about building a home. The old navy suit is still hanging in my closet. I don't see it as a symbol of shame anymore. I see it as a symbol of strength, a reminder that the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can buy, but the ones you are willing to sacrifice everything for. So, to anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small, who has been judged on what you have instead of who you are, I hope my story gives you a little bit of strength. The best revenge isn't loud and dramatic. Sometimes, it's the quiet, steady work of building your own dream on your own terms. And sometimes, the most satisfying sound in the world isn't applause, but the soft, quiet clatter of a fork being dropped in disbelief. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.